Random House Audio presents Manhunt, the 10-year search for bin Laden, from 9/11 to Abbottabad, by Peter Bergen, read for you by Deakins. We sleep soundly in our beds because rough men stand ready in the night to visit violence on those who would do us harm. Winston Churchill. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself for a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat. Theodore Roosevelt. A note about this book. I first met Osama bin Laden in the middle of the night in a mud hut in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan in March 1997. I was there to produce his first television interview for CNN. In person, bin Laden was not the table-thumping revolutionary I had expected, presenting himself as a low-key cleric. But while his manner was mild, his words were full of a raw hatred of the United States. Bin Laden surprised us by declaring war on the United States on camera, the first time he had done so before a Western audience. That warning, of course, was not sufficiently heeded, and 4 years later came the 9/11 attacks. In a sense, I've been preparing to write this book ever since. While the exact timing of bin Laden's capture or death could not be predicted, it was all but inevitable that he would eventually be tracked down. The book you're about to read is the full story of how that happened. After bin Laden was killed, I traveled to Pakistan 3 times, on my last visit making an extensive tour of the Abbottabad compound in which he lived his final years. I was the first outsider to be granted entry by the Pakistani military, which controlled all access, and 2 weeks after my visit, in late February 2012, the complex was demolished. The visit to the compound helped me form a much better understanding of the way Al-Qaeda's leader and his family and followers lived there for years undetected, and of the U.S. Navy SEAL raid that killed bin Laden. I stood in the room where bin Laden lived for almost 6 years of his life, and where he finally died. I also spoke to a variety of Pakistani security and military officials who investigated the SEAL raid and who debriefed his wives and children who were living on the compound. On the U.S. side, I spoke to almost every senior official at the White House, Defense Department, CIA, State Department, National Counterterrorism Center, and Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who was responsible for building and assessing the intelligence on bin Laden, weighing the possible courses of action in response to the suspected bin Laden compound, and overseeing the execution of the raid. Many of these officials are quoted by name in the book, but several could not be quoted directly due to the sensitivity of aspects of the mission. In the cases where a CIA official's name has not been made public, I have used a pseudonym. No one, including myself, has interviewed the U.S. Navy SEALs who were on the mission. The anti-secrecy website WikiLeaks proved another very useful source of information. By consulting leaked classified documents about Guantanamo, I was better able to map out bin Laden's movements after the 9/11 attacks and to reconstruct how CIA officials were able to zero in on the courier who led them to the Al-Qaeda leader's front door. Because a U.S. government document is secret does not, of course, guarantee that it is accurate, and so I did my best to cross-reference those documents with a variety of other accounts and sources. This reporting was supplemented by additional interviews with former CIA officials and U.S. military officers involved in the hunt for bin Laden in the decade after 9/11, and multiple trips to Afghanistan to retrace bin Laden's footsteps at the Battle of Tora Bora, where he managed to evade the grasp of the United States during the winter of 2001. When I met bin Laden back in 1997, It was outside the Afghan city of Jalalabad and close to the mountains of Tora Bora, the region from which 4 years later, just months after 9/11, he would stage one of history's great disappearing acts and become the subject of the most intensive and expensive manhunt of all time. It was perhaps fitting that a decade later, on the moonless night of May 1st, 2011, bin Laden's final reckoning would begin with helicopters launched from Jalalabad airfield. As they ascended, the Navy SEALs on board could see through the pixelated green glow of their night vision goggles the mountains of Tora Bora, only 30 miles to the south, rising 14,000 feet to the sky. The last place that a small group of American Special Operations Forces had bin Laden in their sights. This time, they vowed, bin Laden would not escape America's grasp. Prologue. A comfortable retirement. It was a perfect hiding place. Squint a little, and the neat houses that climb up the green hills and compact mountains that surround Abbottabad are reminiscent of Switzerland, or maybe Bavaria. This Pakistani city of some 500,000 souls sits at 4,000 feet in the foothills of the Himalayas, which march in ranks toward the border with China. The town was founded in 1853 by James Abbott, an English officer who was a bit player in the great game that pitted the British and Russians against each other as they struggled for mastery in Central Asia. Somewhat unusually for an administrator of the Raj, Major Abbott was beloved by the inhabitants of Abbottabad. Abbott even penned an awkward but heartfelt poem to the town when he departed for England. I remember the day when I first came here, and smelt the sweet Abbottabad air. I bid you farewell with a heavy heart. Never from my mind will your memories thwart. Vestiges of Abbottabad's colonial past can be seen in the Anglican Church of St. Luke's, which looks like it was airlifted in from Sussex, and the occasional sets of low-slung 19th century buildings lining the main roads that once housed the administrators of the empire. Abbottabad is known today as the City of Schools, and is home to a number of excellent prep schools and Pakistan's leading military academy. U.S. Special Forces soldiers were posted there in 2008 to help with the training of recruits. Enticed by its relatively cool summers and negligible crime rate, a mix of retired Army officers and civil servants, as well as some who have made good working in the Gulf, have been drawn to live in Abbottabad. The vacation high season begins in June, when families from the hot plains of Pakistan travel there to cool off and to revel in its soft mountain breezes. The golfers among them can play on one of the country's finest courses. The overall vibe is a little more country club than the rest of Pakistan's heaving, teeming, smog-filled cities. Despite Abbottabad's relative obscurity, foreigners are not unknown here. Western adventurers drawn by the Karakoram Highway, which wends its way through the city before heading north toward China, 300 miles away, occasionally stop off to stock up on camping supplies or linger at an ice cream shop. And wealthy Afghan refugees fleeing the instability in their country have built large walled compounds to hide their womenfolk. It was to the placid environs of Abbottabad, half a decade after his great victory on 9/11, that Osama bin Laden decided to retire. It was one of the last places in Pakistan that anyone would have suspected he might be living. Far enough from the tribal regions of Pakistan, where pretty much every observer believed he was based, so that he would be hard to find, yet not so far away that he couldn't communicate relatively easily by courier with his key lieutenants, many of whom lived in those regions. It was also close to Pakistan-held Kashmir and the Kashmiri militant groups to which bin Laden had long allied himself, a support network that might come in handy. By the spring of 2011, the terrorist mastermind was in his 6th year of hiding out in the Bilal town neighborhood of Abbottabad. It isn't the city's glitziest address, but with its porticoed white villas interspersed with small shops selling fruits and vegetables, it is certainly a reasonably pleasant place to live. 7 years earlier, the man whom bin Laden had entrusted with his life, someone known within al-Qaeda by the alias Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, the Kuwaiti who is the father of Ahmed, had begun assembling some...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?